Welcome to the latest episode of High Stakes. I'm Paige Soya, managing partner of K Street Capital, and this season is all about exits. And today we have Joe Fluet, who's actually one of our original founding K Street members.
I don't want to push back in the first 30 seconds of the podcast.
Love it.
I'm not sure I count as a founder. I was one of the top, maybe first 7 or 8.
Okay.
I have founded companies. I don't think K Street counts as one. I wish I could say it.
I appreciate that. But one of the first investors, let's put it that way.
I was.
Investors. So this will be an interesting conversation because you have been an actual founder of businesses and have gone through, maybe you wouldn't call it exits, but we'll talk about that in a second, multiple times. But you've also been an investor. So you've been on both sides of the table and you've done deals as an angel investor and in VC funds and things like that. So maybe we can talk about both of them a little bit. But before we get there, let me just back up and maybe if you want to give a quick intro of your background to start, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, so as you said, my name's Joe Fluet. My main area is defense and aerospace, my main business area. I started my professional career many moons ago as a military aviator. I flew helicopters and other aircraft in the U.S. Army. And between active and reserve time, I spent 21 years in uniform. 9 of it was active, the rest was in the reserves. Multiple combat tours, including a couple trips to Afghanistan, where I stood up what is now, well, it's gone now, but what became the first Special Operations Aviation Unit in the Afghan Air Force, something I was quite proud of, and was a lot like being a founder, standing up a military unit from scratch. And I did that before I founded any companies, so that experience came in quite handy, as was pretty much everything I learned in the military has come in handy in my life. I left active duty after 9 years in the mid-90s, went to law school, practiced law for 8 or 10 years or so. I was with Williams & Connolly, K Street firm, after clerking for a federal appellate judge. In 2010, I retired out of the Army Reserves. I quit my job at Williams & Connolly and started a law firm and simultaneously started MAG Aerospace, which the law firm is now a mid-sized law firm focusing on national security in Northern Virginia area. MAG now has thousands of employees and is one of the largest, is probably the world's leading provider of aerial surveillance and airborne intelligence gathering. I have had a few exits. Now I mostly sit on boards, as you know, Paige, and I mostly do investing. I'm mostly on the other side of it now.
Yeah. So, and I know we were kind of talking about this earlier, but I was remembering your whole background and thinking like, yeah, you've been through at least 3 exits that I know about, but you don't consider them exits. So maybe why don't you share what they were and why you don't consider them exits maybe?
Yeah, well, I don't. So of the companies I've founded, I have exited would be close. I have taken money off the table in 2 of them. One of them is the law firm that I started, and the other one is MAG Aerospace. And both of those instances, I didn't and wouldn't consider it an exit. As we spoke about earlier, I'm of 2 minds about the term serial entrepreneur. A lot of people use it as a bragging point. I'm so-and-so, I'm a serial entrepreneur. It can be a good thing, but it's not necessarily automatically a good thing. And it certainly has never been my approach. You can make a lot of money by starting companies, raising some money, taking the money out, and letting the company roll into a ditch, and then you start the next company. And that's not to say that all serial entrepreneurs do that, but many do. So when someone tells me they're a serial entrepreneur, a lot of people in our space consider that to be an automatic bragging right. And unless you've done it correctly, I don't agree with that, because my main goal with every business I've ever started, everyone I've ever been involved with, has been to make the world a better place. And if I can't improve the human condition with what I'm doing, I really can't get motivated to do it. I won't get out of bed. So the exits I've had, I've recapped companies where I've taken money off of the table. I have never started a company that I'm not still involved with, either as a board member or in some other capacity, and that I don't still have, in some cases, significant money in. And so, because that's just not, I'm not interested in doing it any other way. And some of that is just fundamental ethics in my view, but some of it is also just kind of knowing myself. I've been approached repeatedly with what I think are excellent business ideas, but it's not something that I can get excited about personally. And I know this. And so I might say, oh, I'll put in some money, but a lot of times what they want is my help. And I'll just be honest, I'm not going to, I know myself, I will not get excited about this. So there might be a good return, but even the money doesn't really excite me if it's not going to make the world a better place. And so, again, that's just sort of, as I went through my brief biography, you may notice, not 5 jobs, but 5 careers I have had. Careers, complete changes. And some of that is sort of natural ADD. And some of that is always looking for the next way I think I can pitch in to try to make this plan better.
Well, you're a gem, Joe. There's not a lot of people like you that feel that way about things when they start companies. So it's sort of a rare perspective that I don't get to hear every day. But it's up to you. You choose which ones you think are the most interesting takeaways from these various experiences. But I think the MAG would be a really interesting one because that company grew. You grew that. I don't remember exactly if you were the original founder, like from day 0, were you?
I was.
Yeah. And then grew it to be like $1 billion firm, right? So maybe if you talk about what the buyout looked like, or was it a PE, if it was a PE firm.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm under NDA, so I can't talk about the numbers. With the recapitalization, I can speak in broad terms only. With respect to the numbers, I can talk all you like about the process, which I found
that's more of the, is like, what are the takeaways, if you were doing it again, like things you learned going through that?
Yeah. Doing it again, my takeaway would be the first time you do it, you must, not must, because I did it without one. You should do everything you can to find a mentor who's done it before. It was, having multiple combat tours and, then a law school and a bunch of other things. I hesitate to say that going through that, well, let me back up a little bit. With MAG, we did a formal sales process. Got an investment banker, raised interest, did management prezos. We did the full everything, which I don't recommend in all cases, but we thought was best for us at the time, because I was very concerned about our next investors being people who would allow us and encourage us to keep our core values intact. And so I wanted to cast a very wide net so I could winnow it down to people I trusted. But that process, again, I hesitate to say it was the hardest thing I ever did, but if it isn't, it's up there for sure.
You've done a lot of hard things, so that's saying a lot, I think, for people who haven't been through that.
I'm not trying to be boastful, but yes, it's fact that I've done a lot of hard things, and this was definitely up there. I would tell people, get a mentor. Find someone who's done it before. Do whatever you have to do, because I don't know the number of times that I'm sitting around the conference table with all of our executives, and this person wants to do this, do that, left, right, up the middle. What are we going to do? And everyone gets done talking about what they think. Then they all turn to me, and I'm thinking to myself, how the hell should I know what we're supposed to do? This is my first time too, just like all the rest. Like, of course, I didn't express that. Leaders should never do that.
Yep.
So, I would make a decision. We would press on, but I really would have liked to have had someone. And it wasn't until actually after that transaction that I actually was able to find a mentor. And it wasn't that I didn't think it mattered. And again, I don't want this to come out wrong, but MAG was growing so quickly, and we were so successful with that effort, for which I take just all I did was point the direction. All the hard stuff was done.
I'm sure that's not all you did, but sure.
But the other, the C-level executives get 95% of the credit. Again, my job was to point in every direction, try to get everybody to line up as they followed me off the cliff. But we had so much success that I just couldn't find someone who had done better than I had at this. And I wasn't much interested in a mentor that hadn't done as well as I had. Eventually, it turns out there's lots of people like that. I was just who are way better at it than I am. I just wasn't able to find one until after we'd done that process. So I would almost say the best lesson learned from me that I could pass on to someone who's looking at it, in fact, I'm doing this for a friend right now, is find someone who's done it before. It really would, it will take so much of the weight of that off your shoulders if you've got someone you can call and bounce the things off before you press on.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And that's part of why we wanted to do this season about exits, because they're all very different and they're all very complicated. And it depends on what kind of buyer it is, what stage the business is, what type of business it is. And even in all those buckets, they're still all very different. So it's a different experience each time. And the more you know about it, the better prepared you can be for what's coming, I guess. And finding a great way to do that, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I draw a lot of aviation analogies because I'm still an avid pilot, as you know. And so if you're buying an airplane, a lot of people make the mistake because I love airplanes. We have lots of them in MAG. I personally own 3 of them. So I'm fond of, I think it was Jesse Helms, the senator, when he's from South Carolina, and someone asked him how many guns he had. And what Helms said was, more than I need, but not as many as I want, which I always thought was a funny way to say, well, I'm that way about airplanes. I have 3 more than I need, but I don't have as many as I want. But a lot of people start airplanes. I'm getting somewhere with this, believe it or not. With airplanes, they start with, I want that airplane, right? That's a great airplane and I want it. And I always tell people, if you're going to buy an airplane, start with what you want to do. Start with your mission. How many people are you taking around? What is the ranges you're looking for? What's the weather like where you're going, right? And then you can pick an airplane that will be able to accomplish the mission you want. Well, it's the same thing. When you're doing an exit, decide what your goal is. And you need to decide that, frankly, long before you're looking at exit. Really, I don't think you should start a company without deciding what are you trying to achieve here. And if what you're trying to achieve is just make as much money as you can, that's probably the simplest way to run a business, right? That you only now have one criterion for everything you do. And again, that was never my main criterion. You can't ignore that. As I was fond of telling employees, I still say it all the time. Like, I like paying my mortgage and buying groceries. I assume you guys do too. So let's all work really hard to make sure we can pay our mortgage and buy groceries. So you can't ignore the money. Without money, there's no company. But if that's your primary goal, you're going to run the business very differently than if, say, again, you're trying to improve the world and you're trying to make the world a better place. Or, what my goal with one of my top goals with all the companies I founded or continue to work with is to build something to last, right? I think I look at some of these companies like General Electric that was founded by Thomas Edison, still around. And that's, to me, that's something really admirable. My father is an entrepreneur, and he founded what is today one of the largest, I think the largest geotechnical engineering firm in the world. And I don't know, it's probably 8 or 10 years ago, I'm driving down the highway and I see a truck go by. It's Geosyntec, the name of the company, with a Geosyntec label. And I called him and I said, that's what I want. I want someday, one of my sons, or they're in an airport and they see a plane with a MAG logo. And that actually has happened. Taxiing in, and you've built something to last there. And it's not so much about legacy, it's just sort of personally what I wanted. I'm not even sure I answered your question. I think I devolved quite a bit there.
Well, question about that then for you. I mean, did you have, and if you can share, did you have investors in the early days of MAG?
So we started out bootstrapping it. And so I started the law firm, Fluet Law, which is still around. And if you're in this space, you're probably familiar with them. And it was probably about 10 or 12 months after I started Fluet Law that I got the opportunity to start MAG. And so I made a little bit of money with Fluet Law at that point, kind of Elon musted at that point, rolled all that money into MAG and got MAG off the ground. But aviation gets very expensive very quickly.
Right.
And so my wallet was fat, but not that fat. And, you start buying airplanes. And so after about 2.5 years, we were the dog that caught the car. We were doing things differently. We were really good at what we did. We were, trying to be ethical in everything we did. And it was all working. But it got to the point, where we're all emptying our 401ks. I've got 3 mortgages on my house. There's just, we have got to go get some help here. And so I had Clairvest Group out of Toronto. The CEO of Clairvest, a guy named Ken Rotman, had kind of been chasing me a little bit. He'd bump into me at air shows and everything like that. If you ever need investors, blah, blah. And so I called him. And the process of taking our first investors for me was more about gaining comfort with the type of person Ken Rotman was and how he was running his private equity firm. It was much more about that than, what can they do for me? I didn't really expect to get much help. Like, a good PE can also help you, right, in lots of business ways. They're out of Toronto. He wasn't in my space. I didn't expect much of that, but I really didn't feel like I needed too much help in the business side of it. I just needed money, and I needed someone who's going to share my values. And so I took about a year and got to, more than that, maybe 1.5 years, got to know Ken, met his family, and was convinced that he did share my values. And then we went through the process of negotiating a deal, which, notwithstanding the fact that we become friends, was a hammer and tong negotiation, right? As it should be. That's probably why we're still friends.
Well, the reason I ask is because if the way you think about building companies is something that you want with staying power in the long term, and it's sort of mission driven, and that's what matters to you. Whereas with investors, obviously what matters to them is their return because they have LPs, that is their job, right? So how did you sort of like, how were you able to marry the two in this process?
That is a fantastic question. And really, it boils down to selecting the right investors. In fact, so I think this was your question that I failed to answer. So I guess we were at ClearVest about 6 or 7 years, and we had outgrown ClearVest. Like
Oh, wow.
ClearVest at that point, I want to say was 2 or 3 billion under management. It's 5 now. So actually, ClearVest also is a wildly successful PE. So they raised 3 more funds since then, all of which were oversubscribed. So they actually probably could have kept up with us, but I was afraid they couldn't. And I needed to be making, at that point in MAG's development, I needed to be making $100 to $300 million acquisitions. And at that point, that wasn't something ClearVest could support. So I know I would have stayed with them longer if I could have, because our relationship was just stellar, but I'd outgrown them.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I had to go looking for someone else. But so to answer your question, I did this with both of the private equity investors I worked with. I told them up front that understand that maximizing return will not be my top priority. And I could give them an easy example. So we're in the surveillance business. So we create and integrate aerial platforms to gather information, manned or unmanned. And then we put that information into a usable form for customers and give it to them so they can make good decisions that save lives, save time, save money. We do it in every context, not combat. We do environmental monitoring. We do fire detection in the old growth forest in Canada. There's lots of different ways that aerial surveillance platforms can be useful. We do it in literally every way. But I told them both, look, this isn't an if, this is a when. When some tin pot dictator comes to me and wants me to do what I do in order that he can better oppress his people, and he's going to offer me ridiculous amounts of money, I'm going to say no. And you can't make me say anything else. And so I'm going to say no. And so we need to understand that up front. Money is important. I understand that. Again, I like paying my mortgage and buying groceries, and I have to give a return. And I feel a tremendous responsibility to make sure that you get the return you deserve, but it will not be my top priority. If you're not okay with that, we shouldn't do business. The advice I would give to anyone watching this, it's too late to have that conversation after they've already invested. Like at that point, the ship has sailed. It's so. And to do another ship analogy, once they have invested, it's like Cortez, burn the ships, right? We're in here together. There's no getting out, right? We're partners. Nobody quits, and we're going to drive through this thing till its completion and we make it work.
I mean, I feel like a broken record, but I feel like on every episode I say the same thing, but it's just so important to understand the motivations and alignment with the investors in the deal, because when you get to that point of exit or whatever, like you want to know ahead of that, like way ahead of that, what everyone wants to do.
It is too late. Once you've taken on investors, it is too late. And this is how a lot of, you say motivation too. One thing that I think a lot of people leave out is values. Like, what are your values? What are the core things that get you up in the morning, right? Yeah. And those values have got to be aligned. And if they're not, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's going to be so much harder to get it done.
Yeah,
nothing's ever impossible, but it'll be a lot harder if your values aren't.
Oh yeah. So maybe switching gears here and thinking about this on the other side as an investor, right? Because you've invested in a lot of companies that you didn't want to be an operator in and had a number of exits, some of them through K Street. I know what some of them are, not all of them, but maybe if you're thinking about it from the perspective of, and maybe in a lot of these cases, when you're a smaller angel investor, you don't have a say about the way an exit turns out, right? But maybe you would have, changed the terms or done something differently when you put the check in initially, had you known certain things or understood how those exits would play out. So I'm curious, like what takeaways you have from that experience.
One of the things I love about K Street, and take a minute to plug, the organization that both you and I both love, is you have a chance, even as a small investor, to be involved. Because these companies are looking for that, right? They're trying to raise a lot more money in most cases than we're going to give them. And so what they love and where there is true value is you have this really extraordinary group of successful Washington people, let's put it that way, who are
Yeah.
excited about business and want to help out. And so it's one of the things I like is you can kind of harmonize those things. And I would say the same thing, be careful where you put your money, because that's power, that's influence. And you want to put your money with people whose values align with you.
And maybe talk about, I'm thinking of one of the exits I know, actually, I think you were the one that brought the deal in back in the day. It was Ride Scout.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Great company.
Great exit for K Street.
Yeah. So here's, anyone who's worked with me knows this. I have pluses and minuses as a businessman. One of the minuses, honestly, is the almost unreasonable optimism that I look at the world with. A lot of the teams that have worked for me over the years, this term developed. They called it the juke, JOOC. That's the Joe overly optimistic conversion. Because, and I learned it, I remember I'd never seen the show Shark Tank. And one night I can't sleep or whatever. And so I turn on the TV and it's on. And it's a great show. I don't even know if it's still on, but it's really good. So I sat there and watched like 11 episodes in a row, all night long.
20.
Yeah. And then the next morning I called one of my good friends who I was in business with. And I was like, okay, I've learned something about myself. I just watched 50 pitches on Shark Tank and I loved every single one of them. Right? Everyone, I'm like, this is going to be huge. This is great. I love this. Part of success in life in general is, I tell young people all the time, everyone has flaws, everyone has shortcomings. The trick is to know what they are, right? If there's a big distance between who you think you are and who you really are, that causes problems. It's okay. Again, we're all flawed. So that's my flaw is I look at every deal through rose-colored glasses. And the first few years with K Street, I invested in every single deal.
Working out well for you. Yeah, in law.
I'll take a little credit for being for the juke with Ride Scout, for instance. So
Right.
Ride Scout came. K Street was interesting in those days. There was a small number of us, like 8 or 10 or 12 maybe at the time.
Really?
And we used to meet at this restaurant. I don't remember. I want to say it was in Penn Quarter, but I can't remember. And we'd get a room, and then they'd come in and do pitches, and we'd quiz them. And at one point, we kind of had a rule: we're all in or we're all out, right? Because there were relatively small investments, and it didn't really matter enough to the. So that's it's unanimous, like a jury. And Ride Scout came in early, and I loved it. I thought it was the best idea ever. I wanted to invest, and I got downvoted. And I remember them saying, well, let's wait till Uber talks to him. I'm like, well, when Uber talks to him, it's too late, right? Like, we want to make the real money. So then Ride Scout came back about a year or 18 months later, and we had invested then, and we still made lots of money. But I was like, right. Well, once my overly optimistic view would have paid off.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I guess I didn't realize that. So they came back twice.
Back a second time. Now, for God's sakes, don't quote me on this. This is a long time ago. I've done a lot of deals since then, but I'm 90% sure that's the company I'm thinking of. There was a company, I'm 90% sure it was Ride Scout. I should call Craig and ask him, but the founder, and because who I'm still friends with, by the way. And so, yeah, like 90% sure it was Ride Scout. They came in, I wanted to do it. We didn't get unanimous. And then they came back. And again, it was still a really good deal for K Street, but it would have been a lot better if we'd done it, the first round.
Yeah, exactly. So that's an interesting point. It's like the exit would have been even larger. Been willing to consider at that point, which is funny because we at K Street, we try at this point, and I don't know if this was the case back then, but we try to invest once the company has product to market fit, or if we believe that they have that. And if they don't, they're too early, then we'll pass. But sometimes we invest in them 2-3 years later, and it still ends up being a good deal. But it's it's different strokes for different folks, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think these numbers probably better than I do, Paige. But I think with angel or seed investing, and people have done the math on this, you have to be in 20 odd investments before mathematically you can make any money, because most of them are going to fail. I mean, it's just math. And so if you're, and I'll say another thing too. So I think I was a very good entrepreneur. I think that's just demonstrable. I'd like to think I was a good CEO, which is not the same thing as being an entrepreneur, by the way. I had to learn a new job when Mag got a certain size. And you don't see a lot of lawyers who become good entrepreneurs or CEOs. And I think that's because one of the challenges with law is you learn all the horrible things that can happen, right? Now, I tried to view that as an advantage. I've seen the potholes. I know where they are. But what that can do to a lot of people in business, legal experience can make them too timid. You just hide under your desk because you think everything's going to go wrong, because that's all you spent years just fixing other people's catastrophes.
Mhm.
And so, because in the end, a free market economy only really rewards risk, right?
Yeah.
If you're smart, wake up to an alarm clock every day, work hard, do all the things you're supposed to do, you'll do well in America. I mean, really well. You'll make lots of money. But if you want to make real money, like plane and boat and vacation home money, you have to take risk. There's just that's what a free market economy rewards, is risk. And so, that's always the balancing act. Dumb risks are dumb risks. But you also have to accept going in, I'm going to make some dumb risks. I'm going to make some bad calls. But if nothing ever fails, you're too risk averse.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm fond of saying the process of entrepreneurship is trying things, most of which don't work. Most.
Exactly. All the time, over and over again.
Yeah.
Never end.
But as Mark Cuban says, you only got to be right once.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can be wrong 1,000 times. You only got to be right once.
Yep. And then I guess the only other thing I would ask, and maybe if you have any, I know we're coming up on time here, but if you have any other thoughts, takeaways, things you'd share about having been through sort of multiple transactions on both sides, great to share. But I know you're also an investor in other funds as well. And so I don't know if you see the exits, or if you have any, like, if you've had thoughts from being an LP, which is like one thing removed, I guess, like you're probably not as involved in a lot of those deals, but from an exit perspective and how those funds have turned out.
It's being an LP is really fun, I think, because I can get the upside and I don't have to do all the work. So people like you are working really hard, to make sure that my money grows and is working for me. And I'm very grateful for that. If I haven't said so, I'll say so now. But so it's really fun. And I think because of the relationships I have, I'm an LP in 3 different institutional investing organizations, and I can be as involved as I want to be. The leadership of all of those. In fact, I'm not as involved as I want to be. I've got too many irons in the fire right now. And so I don't, I wish I could clone myself 5 more times in the things I'm interested in. I wish I could work on. So, one of the things, and what I love too, is just, again, helping people that are out there creating jobs, growing planet Earth. I mean, human beings, we're just amazingly adaptive and industrious creatures, right? You put us anywhere and we start, some people think this is bad. I don't. We start cutting down the trees and building houses and, making fires and inventing things. And, that's what we do. We're just really good at it. And we're kind of programmed at some level to do that. And so I love watching that. And I love building things. And when you get done, you can look at something and say, look what we've accomplished, and we did it together. And being in the money business now, which I primarily am, is interesting because it does allow you, unlike being an entrepreneur, to sort of get as involved as you want to be. And whereas, an entrepreneur, again, after I've got multiple mortgages on my house and I had to empty my 401k and pay the penalties, what's the saying in ham and egg breakfast? The chicken's involved, the pig's committed, right? So when you're the entrepreneur, you're committed.
Yep, so. Definitely. Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Joe. This
Anytime.
I really appreciate it.
No, thank you for all you do with K Street. You've taken what was an organization that I cherish. And again, I don't want to take founder credit. Maybe I'll take founding team credit. It's a few months old, when I joined. So it's an organization I care a lot about. And you've really taken it to the next level. And that means a lot to me personally, because as you know, building things to last are what matters to me.
Well, yeah, and you've also been an investor this whole time is incredible. So thank you for that
Yes.
too. You've been with K Street all these years, through all the different deals, through all the ups and downs in the market. Thank you so much.